Number 1.
Douglas was last seen with his friend and co-worker, Mark Seelman, in Rome, New York on June 7, 1990. They were both last seen at DJ's bar in the 6400 block of Martin Street. They left the bar at some point later in the morning. They were last seen at a bar called DJ's, located then on Martin Street in Rome. Neither Seelman, then 16, nor Goodwin, then 18, have ever been seen again. For police, there have been many leads and many dead ends in the cold case of Mark Seelman and Douglas Goodwin, who both went missing June 7, 1990, in Rome. They were last seen at a bar called DJ's, located then on Martin Street in Rome. Neither Seelman, then 16, nor Goodwin, then 18, have ever been seen again. Because he was a minor, Seelman's case was treated as that of a missing child, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has helped keep interest in the case alive. The most recent lead came in response to an Observer Dispatch story published in June about the anniversary of the disappearance, that focused on the impact of the loss on Seelman's family. Mike Houlihan, senior investigator for state police in Marcy, said someone called after reading the story and said they remembered seeing suspicious clothing in a wooded area in Steuben. He said he had seen some old clothing years back where this occurred, Houlihan said. We searched a lot of that area and couldn't find anything. That was the only lead that developed. In recent weeks, state police officials have decided to attempt to produce an age-enhanced photo of Goodwin. When asked why such a photo wasn't produced previously, or why a photo of Goodwin wasn't circulated along with a missing persons filer of Seelman, Houlihan said that it is an old case, and he has no way of knowing what previous investigators were thinking at the time. A lot of bad things. At the time the pair disappeared, they were in a bar next door to the former Franco's Florists, said Barbara Lee Fendler Ruiz of Rome, whose sister owned the flower shop and a wooded lot located behind DJ's. Her sister declined to comment for the story, but Fendler Ruiz said the bar was a rough place. Its patrons would vandalize the flower shop, she said. There were a lot of bad things that were going on over there at that time and people looked the other way, Fendler Ruiz said. I don't think they ever left that bar. She recalled when the teens disappeared that law enforcement searched the lot. The minute the kid went missing, I said a prayer for him. And I'm not a praying person, she said. I hope they find out what happened to him. The building is now under new ownership and is an auto shop. A lead surfaced years ago in Missouri, where a person was found using Seelman's social security number. After reviewing Seelman's case files, Houlihan said the person, who was a female, had no connection to Seelman. He said the female most likely got Seelman's social security number off of a missing persons flyer from February 1991 that featured his full name, date of birth and his social security number. So this was sent all over the country, he said. That information is still out there. State officials first received the tip about the social security number from the state missing persons office in the Division of Criminal Justice Services. That office informed state police that the social security number was used in 1995 and 1996. In 1998, the female was confronted about the incident. She denied knowing Seelman and denied having the social security number.
Number 2.
Gail was last seen in Thanatisasa, Florida on September 22, 1972. She arrived home from school and made herself a sandwich. Afterwards at 5 p.m., she told her parents that she was going for a walk. She took her pet raccoon, Bandit, with her on a leash. 3 witnesses came forward and claimed they had seen Gail on the evening of her disappearance. One of the witnesses was a man who had known Gail. He said he saw her walking west on Thanatisasa Road at 5:30 p.m. Another resident reported seeing Gail walking on McIntosh Road, which was about a mile from Thanatisasa Road at 7:30 p.m. Gail never returned home and was never seen or heard from again. Extensive searches with over 150 searchers on both foot and horseback and even helicopters were unable to find Gail. Waterways and Lake Thanatisasa were also searched with no success whatsoever. On September 25, 1972, investigators received a tip which said that a woman saw Gail walking near an orange grove near the intersection of State Road 579 and Pruitt Road. The tip stated that Gail was naked except for newspapers which were wrapped around her. The tip gave hope that Gail was alive, but she was not found. By the time 6 days had passed since she disappeared, investigators announced that they believed Gail was abducted. Several witnesses stated they had seen Gail standing near a white car. The car is described as possibly being a small white 1962 to 1965 Chevy Tour automobile of some type. An unidentified man was possibly seen standing against the vehicle. He is described as being Caucasian and stood between 5'10" and 6'03" tall. He weighed approximately 180 to 190 pounds and was approximately 28 to 30 years old in 1972. He was a medium to dark complexion, had short dark brown colored hair, and had long sideburns. Bloodhounds also traced Gail's scent to a spot beside Thanatasasa Road, very close to her home. The trail ended at that location, which indicated that Gail either got into a vehicle or was placed in one there. It should also be noted that Gail's pet raccoon, Bandit, also never returned home. He had a burn on his foot and a scart on his nose. Investigators found and brought in approximately 17 deceased raccoons, but none of them turned out to be Bandit. He has never been found. Gail's parents both stated that their daughter would never have left on her own accord. She was close to her older brother at the time and had no problems at home. They believed that whoever abducted Gail gained her trust through Bandit. Gail enjoyed showing him to people. Investigators checked to see if Gail could be a possible identity for the bodies of various murdered women found in Hernando County, Florida. One of the bodies found came from a 13-year-old girl. The body was not Gail. 3 people have claimed responsibility for kidnapping and murdering Gail. One of these people was serial killer Gerald Staino. Staino confessed to killing 41 women from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Florida. He confessed that he caused Gail's death and gave investigators a description of the location of her remains. Gail's remains were never found, and Staino was never charged with killing her. He also confessed to the 1975 Florida murder of Susan Bassel, a 12-year-old girl who went missing from Port Orange, Florida. Her body was never found. Staino was executed in 1998. At the time of her disappearance, Gail had recently moved to Florida from Romulus, Michigan, just a few months before her disappearance. She enrolled at Greco Junior High School about 3 weeks before her disappearance. She has 6 siblings. Her parents never gave up hope of finding her. Gail's disappearance remains unsolved and foul play is suspected. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office 813-247-8000.
Number 3.
Leigh Occhi was last seen in Tupelo, Mississippi on August 27, 1992. She was last seen at her family's home, which was located on the 100 block of Honey Locust Drive. She was last seen by her mother, Vicki Felton, at 7:35 a.m. as she left the house to go to work. Leigh was staying at home by herself to wait for her grandmother to come and pick her up. Leigh was planning to attend an open house at her school. There were very bad weather conditions that day due to Hurricane Andrew moving over the area. Vicki became concerned for Leigh and called her at least twice at 8:30 a.m. Both calls had no answer. Vicki left her job immediately and returned home. She returned to the house and found that the garage door was open and the light was on. This would mean that the door was opened in the past few minutes before Vicki found it. She also discovered that another door of the house was unlocked. Vicki could not find her daughter anywhere and called police at 9 a.m. to report her daughter as missing. Investigators went to the house but found no signs of a forced entry. They did find signs of a struggle inside the home, however. They found blood in various places of the home. It was fresh and still wet. It also matched Leigh's blood type. Investigators found the blood on the walls, the carpet, and a bathroom counter. One of Leigh's nightgowns and her brassiere were found in a laundry basket. Both items were bloodstained. Leigh was known to be wearing the nightgown when her mother left the house. There were also signs of an attempted cleanup in the bathroom, but investigators could not find anything that could have been used to clean it up. Blood was found trailing through the hallway to the living room. It stopped at the back door of the home. The door had blood and hair stuck to the doorframe, which suggested that Leigh hit her head on it. Leigh was never seen or heard from again afterwards. It was found that Leigh's reading glasses, shoes, some clothing, and her sleeping bag were missing from the home. Investigators searched various areas for Leigh and even utilized tracking dogs. They could not find a scent for Leigh due to the weather that occurred on the day she vanished. On September 9th, her mother received a mysterious package in the mail. The envelope was addressed to B. Yarbrough. This was the name of Leigh's stepfather, Barney Yarbrough. He was separated from Leigh's mother at the time. The envelope was postmarked from Boonville, Mississippi, which was over 30 miles away from Tupelo. The envelope also had 6 stamps on it and had the street name Honey Locust, spelled as Honey Locust. The envelope contained Leigh's missing eyeglasses. There was nothing else in the envelope, and forensic examination led nowhere since the stamps had been wet with water and no DNA was present on the envelope. Handwriting analysis found nothing either. Whoever mailed the glasses to Leigh's house has never been identified, and investigators suspect that they were mailed to mislead the investigation into Leigh's disappearance. Investigators gave polygraph exams to both Leigh's stepfather and Vicky. Barney passed the test. Vicky was given a total of 3 exams, and she failed each of them because she showed signs of deception. Investigators have not named her as a suspect in her daughter's disappearance, but consider her a person of interest. Investigators have questioned several people in connection to Leigh's disappearance, but no one had ever been arrested for her disappearance. Leigh's mother disputes the possibility that she was involved with her daughter's disappearance. Vicky has stated she believes that local man, Oscar McKinley Kearns, was responsible for Leigh's presumed death. 9 months after Leigh disappeared, Kearns broke into the Memphis, Tennessee home of a 15-year-old girl and abducted her. He raped her and then released her afterwards. He had known the girl through a Tupelo church. He was convicted of her rape and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. He was released after serving 4 years in prison. After his release, he abducted a married couple and raped the wife. He was sent back to prison afterwards and was released in 2019. Kearns refuses to be interviewed in Leigh's case and has also refused a polygraph in her disappearance. He has not cooperated in the case. Investigators have not named him as a suspect, but he is considered a person of interest as well. He knew Leigh through church as well. After Leigh's disappearance, her father got emergency leave from the military and organized searches for his missing daughter. He stated that he knew from the moment his ex-wife called him to inform him of Leigh's disappearance that she was dead. He believes someone best Leigh to death inside her home. He also believes someone in the family was the one responsible for her murder. He and Vicky has divorced in 1981. He said he didn't get to see Leigh often because of his obligations to the military, but they had a close relationship. He was stationed out of state when his daughter disappeared. Vicky was also a veteran of the armed forces. Her stepfather has since died, and her mother has moved to Michigan. At the time of her disappearance, Leigh lived alone with her mother and was due to start the 8th grade at Tupelo Middle School. She also had a boyfriend at the time of her disappearance. He was never questioned about her disappearance. Leigh's disappearance remains unsolved. Foul play is strongly suspected in her case, and it remains classified as a non-family abduction by law enforcement. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact Tupelo Police Department 662-841-6491. Federal Bureau of Investigation 202-324-3000.
Number 4.
Randy Leach was still a couple weeks away from his high school graduation, but he and his fellow seniors at Linwood High School in Linwood, Kansas, were starting their celebrations early. One of his classmates was throwing a pre-graduation party on the evening of April 15, 1988, and Randy, like most of the senior class, was planning to be there. His mother gave him permission to drive her car for the night. As she handed over the keys to her 1985 Dodge sedan, she told Randy to have fun and reminded him to be home by midnight. Randy promised he would and left his home at 6:30 p.m. Randy's first stop that night was at a local convenience store, where he purchased some candy and soda, then put gas in his mother's car. His next stop was in DeSoto, Kansas, a small town about 10 minutes away from Linwood. There, he stopped by a garage, where he was restoring a 1969 Mustang. The car was his pride and joy, and he couldn't wait until the restoration was complete and he could drive the Mustang, which he intended to paint bright red. He spent a couple hours working on the car, then left to make his way to the party. The party was being held at a rural residence about 5 miles from Randy's home, in a very isolated area. Randy arrived around 9:30 p.m. and scanned the crowd until he found some of his friends. It's estimated that there were as many as 150 people who attended the party at some point that night, and attendees later admitted that there were copious amounts of drugs and alcohol. Randy, who was an athlete at his high school, was not into the drug scene. He was known to occasionally have a couple beers, but no one remembered seeing him drink anything that night. He had certainly been sober when he arrived, but shortly after he got to the party some of his friends noticed that he was stumbling around and appeared to be intoxicated. One of Randy's friends asked him if he was okay, and he indicated that he didn't know what was wrong with him. Some believe that Randy might have been drugged without his knowledge. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall and built like a linebacker, Drinking a couple beers would not have affected him in this way. In the past, Randy had been meticulous about obeying his curfew, and he was always home by midnight. Perhaps because he had always obeyed them in the past, his parents went to sleep well before midnight, assuming their son would be home on time, and they would see him in the morning. When they woke up at 6 a.m., however, there was no sign of Randy, or of his mother's car. Harold and Alberta Leach immediately worried that their son had been in a car accident. He had always been so dependable in the past, so it seemed to be the most logical reason for why he hadn't come home. Not wanting to overreact, they called a few of Randy's friends first, hoping someone might know what had happened. No one had seen Randy since the previous night. Harold called a few of the local hospitals next, but none of them had admitted Randy as a patient. Beginning to panic, Harold called the police and reported Randy missing. Police were reluctant to take the case seriously at first, believing that they were dealing with a 17-year-old boy who was probably just hungover and unwilling to go home. They did go to the home, where the party had been held, but the area had already been cleaned up, and they found nothing to indicate Randy had been a victim of foul play. The teenagers who had attended the party weren't eager to speak with police, as all of them were underage, and almost all of them had been drinking and using drugs. They were able to tell police that Randy had arrived before 10 p.m., and they didn't see him consume any drugs or alcohol. Despite this, he had appeared to be under the influence of something. A couple people said Randy had been acting noticeably different than usual, but they were unsure why. Around 12:30 a.m., several people noticed that Randy appeared to be searching for something. When asked, he told one of them that he had misplaced his car keys. No one could recall if he found them or not, but they assumed that he must have, because his car was no longer at the site of the party. Detectives were able to ascertain that Randy had last been seen at the party around 1:30 a.m., although one person believed he was still there at 2 a.m. No one actually saw him leave, but the host of the party told police that all of those in attendance had left the property by 2:15 a.m. One of Randy's friends, who had been acting as an unofficial designated driver, saw Randy staggering around and guided him back to Mother's Dodge. He said that he already had a carload of people to take home and told Randy to wait there and he would come back to make sure he got home as well. When the friend returned around 2 a.m., however, both Randy and the Dodge were gone. He assumed Randy had decided to drive himself home. Figuring that it might be easier to find a car than a person, an alert was put out for all patrol units to be on the lookout for Alberta Leach's gray Dodge. Linwood was a small town, and police were confident that they would be able to locate the car simply by driving around town for a while. Hours passed, and there was no sign of Randy or his mother's car. Investigators interviewed about 80 people who had been at the party, but each person they talked to maintained that they had no idea what happened to Randy. No one could recall seeing him fighting with anyone, and he had no known enemies. They couldn't imagine that anyone would have any reason to hurt him. Detectives looked into the possibility that Randy may have disappeared voluntarily, but his parents insisted this was not something he would do. He was an only child and was very close with his parents. He did well in school and had no problems at home. He was not planning to attend college, but had talked about enrolling in a trade school after graduation, and his father had recently purchased a new riding mower for him. He planned to make some extra money that summer by mowing lawns. His parents told police that Randy was in the process of restoring a Mustang, and there was simply no way he would have disappeared and left that car behind. There would be some tension between Randy's family and law enforcement due to the way the investigation was initially handled. Because they believed that Randy was a runaway, police never searched the home where the party was held, and it burned to the ground shortly after Randy's disappearance. Harold and Alberta were convinced that Randy fell victim to foul play at the party, and that police might have picked up on it if they hadn't been so convinced that their runaway theory was correct. To their credit, police would later admit that they had been wrong to assume Randy went missing on his own, and they now believe that he was indeed a victim of foul play. The tiny town of Linwood, home to just 370 people in 1988, was stunned by Randy's disappearance. The entire community rallied around his family and helped in the search for the missing teenager. They had always assumed that they lived in a sort of safe haven, one where crime was practically non-existent. Randy's disappearance shattered this illusion of safety and made them more suspicious of strangers and neighbors alike. While police received numerous leads during the first few weeks of the investigation, tips eventually stopped coming, and the case started to go cold. Although Harold and Alberta did everything they could to keep the case in the news, detectives admitted that they had exhausted all leads and still had no idea what had happened to Randy. Desperate to find their son, Harold and Alberta hired a private detective and even consulted with several psychics. Harold spent nearly every hour of the day searching along roads and in wooded areas, looking for any clue that might lead to Randy or the missing car. Both of them wanted to believe that Randy was still alive, but their hopes were fading with each passing day. In their hearts, they knew Randy would have found a way to contact them if he were still living. As is often the case when there is very little factual evidence available, rumors about Randy's fate began circulating through Linwood. Some people thought he might have witnessed something at the party that he wasn't supposed to and had been killed, so he couldn't tell anyone about it. Others claimed Randy had been depressed and suicidal, leading him to take his own life. A few thought he might have decided to run away and start a new life on a beach somewhere. Detectives said there was no evidence to back up any of these theories. By far the most pervasive rumor was that Randy had been sacrificed by a satanic cult, a theory that police have always said is ridiculous and completely without merit. This rumor appeared to start when a man went to police claiming that he had been kidnapped by members of a satanic cult. He claimed that they had held him hostage in a nearby cave for 2 weeks, and during his captivity, he saw a corpse hanging from the ceiling and believed it was Randy. Investigators conducted an extensive search of the cave, but found absolutely nothing to indicate a crime had been committed there. Eventually, the man admitted that he had been on drugs. His claim was nothing more than a hallucination. Despite this, rumors about Randy falling prey to a band of Satanists continued to circulate. Harold continued to search through area caves for years, but never found anything connected to Randy. Randy's case is still considered an active investigation by the Kansas Bureau of Investigation and the Leavenworth County Sheriff's Office. Although they no longer receive many tips, they continue to follow up on any new information as it comes in. In January 2021, several Leavenworth County ponds were searched for any sign of Randy or the missing Dodge. Although the searches were unsuccessful, more are planned for the coming months. Harold and Alberta never gave up their search for Randy, and as they both entered their 70s, they prayed that they would learn what happened to their son before they died. Unfortunately, Harold died on January 28, 2021. Alberta has vowed to continue the search for Randy and find solace in the fact that Harold and Randy are likely together again.
Number 5.
Megan was last seen in Tyler, Texas on March 27, 1991. She was seen playing with her older 8-year-old sister, Fallon, her 6-year-old brother Chance, and her 2 cousins, Nikki who was 8 and Van who was 4. They were playing on a playground on the Casa Grande Apartments, which was located on 4400 Paluxy Drive. Her mother was inside the apartment at the time. The children all went up to apartment 2056, where the Garners lived at the time to get water. Megan was last seen standing by the air conditioner near the laundry room. She was reportedly scared to cross the street, so the children left her outside. Megan disappeared shortly thereafter and was never heard from again. Investigators suspect that Megan was abducted by a non-family member on the day of her disappearance. Many sightings of Megan were sent to police after her alleged abduction. On April 4, investigators received a tip which stated that a child matching Megan's description was seen at a local grocery store about 4 hours after her disappearance. She was seen with an unidentified man who is described as being Caucasian and standing between 5'83" and 5'93". He was approximately 35 years old in 1991, and he had a muscular build. Investigators are unsure if the child seen with the man was in fact Megan, and the man remains unidentified. There are no solid suspects in Megan's case. Her disappearance remains unsolved, but investigators continue to receive tips about her whereabouts. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact Tyler Police Department 903-531-1000.
Number 6.
Daniel was last seen with his mother, Denise Faggett, on March 2, 1989 in Lancaster, California. The pair were last seen by Denise's boyfriend at their apartment they shared as he left for work. They were never seen or heard from again. Denise and Daniel were discovered as missing when Denise's sister stopped by the apartment to retrieve her key. This was 2 hours after they were last seen. The police were called to the residence to investigate the home. They found that the front door was open. They also found that the sliding glass door inside the home was open a few inches. This was odd, because it was a cold day. Investigators believed that the door was possibly forced open, and that someone broke into the home. A single muddy footprint was found on the top of the air conditioning unit next to the sliding glass door. The closet door inside of Daniel's bedroom was also off its tack. Investigators initially believed that Denise left with her son voluntarily. Some agencies refer to Daniel's case as a parental abduction and list Denise as his abductor. Investigators do not believe that he was taken by his mother. No articles of clothing were missing from the home besides the ones that they were wearing that day. Investigators also found that Daniel's car seat and diaper bag were still at the residence, and that Denise's car was parked in its parking place and undisturbed. They also noted that she paid for all utility bills for March of 1989 and she told no one of any plans to travel or leave. Investigators do not know who could have broken into the residence. Denise had recently moved to Lancaster, California following her breakup with Daniel's father and wanted to be closer to her family. Daniel's father lived in the Orange County area at the time of his son's disappearance. His father was interviewed regarding their disappearance and was given a lie detector test in 1999. He apparently failed the test, but investigators have no evidence that he was involved in the case or for an arrest. Investigators believe that both Denise and Daniel were the victims of foul play. The case remains unsolved. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office 213-974-4346.
Number 7.
On August 5, 1989, Lieutenant Keith Despain was working the overnight shift at the Fredericktown Police Department. Despain has lived nearly his entire life in Fredericktown. His father was in law enforcement. His grandfather was in law enforcement. It was not a surprise that Despain would eventually rise to become the city's police chief. If anyone knows the pulse of the tiny town, it's Keith Despain. And his memory is vividly clear of that quiet, muggy August night in 1989. Other than a bicycle found laying in the street, it was as routine as nights get. Earlier, down at the local baseball field, a blonde-haired, green-eyed teenager named Gina Dawn Brooks was watching her brother's game. It ended around 10 p.m., and Gina began walking home on Marshall Street. She said goodnight to her mother Cindy Box, who went to bed. Gina, 13, then told her brother she was going for a bike ride. She left the house around 10:30 p.m., dressed in a blue striped top, white shorts and sneakers, and rode through the quiet town. She was soon confronted by the occupants of an old battered station wagon in front of First Street Baptist Church. Gina kept riding, turned the corner to High Street, where she stopped to talk to her boyfriend. The station wagon came again. Soon, there was a scream, and the station wagon sped away with Gina inside. Her bike was found laying in the street. She was just 5 blocks from her home. Around 2 a.m., Cindy awoke. She found Gina's room empty. She called police, and it didn't take long for Despain to put 2 and 2 together. It was when Cindy reported Gina missing on a bicycle. It was like, now it hits me at home what that bicycle was, he said. By daybreak, Fredericktown was crawling with city, county, state and federal officials. Posters went up. Yellow ribbons hung from trees. There were marches and vigils. Gina Dawn Brooks would become the poster child for cold cases in the St. Louis area. Years went by without a solid lead. And then a letter from Connecticut, having nothing to do with Gina, changed the game. Laura Michelle Dinwiddie had been murdered in St. Louis in 1975. That case also went cold. Nearly 20 years later, St. Louis homicide commander David Heath found a letter waiting for him from Dinwiddie's mother in Connecticut, asking him to never forget the case. Heath turned the case over to homicide detective Chris Pappas. As Pappas dug backwards into the Dinwiddie case, he discovered the original informer in that case was a then 14-year-old teenager named Nathan Danny Williams, who fingered a friend for Dinwiddie's murder. As Pappas looked into Williams' background, he discovered that Williams had served a sentence, not just for rape of a 13-year-old girl in 1979, but was now in prison for the rape and sodomy of a 10-year-old girl in 1989. That landed him a life sentence as a repeat offender. Before long, Pappas had enough evidence to tie him to the murder in the Dinwiddie case. Rob Gerardier was Williams' cellmate in the St. Louis City Jail. Gerardier was in for drug charges. He had no idea what Williams was in for, but was about to find out when Williams had a court appearance. I seen the cameras looking out from the windows in the courthouse, and he's looking down at me, and kind of waving with his hands down his back," Gerardia recalled. "And then I found out what his charge was, and it kind of blew my mind. And then came Gina Dawn Brooks. Despain, Pappas, and FBI agent Bill Francis began the chase. And soon enough, the name Nathan Danny Williams popped up again. They discovered Williams' brother had a close friend who lived very near Gina's home, and Williams frequented the area several times. A police source said during the investigation, Williams eventually agreed to take a lie detector test about Gina. He failed it. And that 1989 rape and sodomy case he was later convicted of. It happened 1 month after Gina's abduction. The noose began to tighten around Nathan Williams. So what happened to Gina, and what is the evidence connecting her to Williams? To understand that, you have to invoke the names of Bryant Squires and Timothy Bellew, friends of Williams. All three would be implicated in her kidnapping. As the years